Grown and Growing podcast, episode number 47, Pleasure Principle, exploring intimacy, sensuality, and pleasure with sex and relationship therapist, Chanta Blue. You're listening to Grown and Growing with Sonia Hamlin.
I'm all about being curious. Like that's one of the main things, especially I tell the couples that I work with, is be curious about yourself and be curious about your partner too, right? Because that will take you a really long way. When we try to box ourselves in, right? Like humans love to label and categorize things, right? But when we try to do that, it cuts us off from so many different wonderful things that we can be experiencing.
Welcome back to the podcast. Did you know that September is Sexual Health Awareness Month? I'd be lying if I said I planned this episode on sex to drop in September. I didn't. I just happened to be scrolling on Instagram before I started recording this intro, and I really just chalked it up to serendipity. In any case, I really love this conversation with sex therapist and pleasure coach, Chanta Blue. I couldn't do a podcast called Grown and Growing without including conversations about sexuality and intimacy. My goal is to evolve, to discover more about myself, and to become freer in all aspects of my life. There are so many layers to this conversation about sex and intimacy and pleasure. And we really start to peel back some of those layers in this conversation with Chanta. I hope you enjoy the conversation as much as I did. So without further ado, let's get into this topic. Welcome to the Grown and Growing podcast, Chanta Blue. How are you?
I'm well. How are you doing today?
I'm fine. First of all, I think your name is gorgeous. And one of my first questions was going to be, is that your real name? Is Chanta Blue your real name?
I get that all the time, actually. Yes, this is my government name.
Okay. It's so pretty.
Thank you. That's why I'm never changing it. It's not gonna happen.
Like, I wonder if this is her Instagram name. Is this her stage name?
No. Chanta Blue.
Well, you're blessed
for 30 some odd years.
Very nice. Well, welcome to the podcast. I want to start off with something a little bit new. The podcast obviously is called Grown and Growing. And so one of the questions where we want to start is asking you, I want to start by asking you, when is the last time you felt really grown?
That is a really good question. The last time I felt really grown, other than when I pay bills, because that's responsibility. But the last time I felt really grown was, the last time I was naked, honestly. Like the fact that I can be naked and in public and just loving on me, not giving a fuck about who's around and what they think. That's the last time I felt really grown.
Okay, so now the follow-up question has to be, because you said naked. I was like, yeah, I can see that. But then you said in public. So where were you that you felt this way?
So there is actually a nude beach here in New Jersey where, I live.
Okay.
And it's based in Sandy Hook. It's a really popular beach. And yeah, I go there as much as I can during the summertime. So
I had no idea. That's awesome. Okay. And the second part of my question, the second part of my question is, what is the last experience that let you know you're still growing? If you can
share. Last experience, definitely. I'm an open book, right? Like as long as you ask the questions, I'll answer them. So the last experience that I realized I was still growing was I am single, right? I've been single for about 2 years now, and going out on dates and being able to advocate for myself. And sometimes I don't advocate for myself in those dates. That's when I know, like, okay, I still have some work to do. Like, yes, I want to be very vocal about my needs, my wants and desires, but there's those little itty bitty times, some dates that I'm just like, I don't want to, but I
Right.
know I need to, right? And so
Yeah.
that's when I'm like, okay, I need to grow in that area. So, I'm always wanting to make sure I tell people how I feel and when I need to.
I love that because you are a licensed clinical a social worker and a
Hmm.
certified sex therapist and a pleasure
Hmm.
coach, which we'll get to. But
Yeah.
it's nice to hear that sometimes even you have to kind of remind yourself to take steps to keep growing, or remind
Hmm.
yourself to step out of yourself, because I just my last podcast was about confidence. And
Hmm.
one of the things that I talked about was, okay, you're 45. At some point, I feel like, is it fair to think that I'm ever gonna, that I'm ever gonna get to a point where I don't feel insecurities, because it's kind of frustrating. You think you know yourself, and then you come and that you find yourself in situations where, you feel a little bit insecure, or your confidence is a little bit lacking. Um,
Hmm.
and so there are times when you still feel that way, but it's good to know that, even, not that you felt that way, but you can, sense when that's happening, so that you can shift and continue to grow on your path.
Right. That's exactly what I was experiencing. That, glimpse of like, if I share this, will this person like me, or will they stop liking me because I have shared this? And I think that's something that we all will struggle with for a significant amount of times in our lives. It's just
Mhm.
a matter of, will it stop us from proceeding forward? Will it stop us from, actually saying, well, no, I don't like this. And I'm okay with sharing that with somebody, regardless of how they view me afterwards.
Right.
Or are you allowing this to be like, yes, this feels uncomfortable, but I'm going to push forward anyway
Hmm.
with this?
Exactly. So let's talk
Mhm.
about your journey, okay? Because you are a licensed clinical social worker, which
Mhm.
sounds very like, like, I am a clinical social worker. I'm going to help people.
Mhm.
A certified sex therapist and a pleasure coach. So
Mhm.
how did you end up on this journey? How did
Right.
you start off as one thing and morphed into the other? Which of your three titles, what came first?
Yeah. So this is actually one of my favorite questions to answer anytime someone asks me this.
Okay.
And yes, there was a progression. I didn't just pop out, in my career and be like, I'm gonna be talking about sex all day, every day, which now I love to do, but that
Okay.
wasn't how it started. So I went to undergrad to Spelman College as a psychology major with a child
Okay.
development minor. I always knew I wanted to work in schools, mainly because my dad was an educator. I had a lot of people in my family who were educators, and that was stability, right? They
Hmm.
always encouraged us. I have boomer parents, so they were always like, find a good job with benefits
Of
and
course.
stay there until you retire, right? And
Yes.
so that's what I was looking at for
Hmm.
going into undergrad. And then towards the end of my college career, I was talking to like a grad school recruiter, and I was just telling her like what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to support my community, and helping them heal and grow and being a lot more hands on and
Hmm.
uncovering like all the different systems that are at play and keeping them from healing and growing and evolving. Right. And she was like, oh, social work is what you want to do then. Like I went to grad school to become a social worker. And I was
Hmm.
like, oh, this is it. That's what I need to do. And I was like, okay, I
Right.
need to be able to do social work in some type of school system so I could have
Hmm.
this stability. But I didn't want to do the typical child study team work that like social workers tend to do in schools. And I knew I wanted to work in high school because younger
Hmm.
kids dealing with parents sometimes
Yes.
isn't always the most fun thing, right?
Right.
That's what I focused on. I focused on trying to find like a mental health program or role within a high school that I could do that was not child study teamwork, because I also didn't want to
Right.
do assessments and things like that.
Hmm.
And so, luckily, right after grad school, I found a job at a high school, like great pay, benefits, like part of the, pension system, all that
Mm-hmm.
good stuff. And so I was working there for about a year, and they asked me to facilitate this sex ed program. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I really want to do this. Like, number one, the training was during my summer break. And I was like, I don't want to give up my summer break to do this training. Like, those are precious
Right.
to me. But I ended up saying yes, and I did it. And I was like, this is amazing. Like, I can literally talk about sex all
Right.
day and do therapy and support teens the way I wanted to. And so I went through the program and
Mm-hmm.
absolutely loved it, and then realized I wanted to do more, right? Like, I wanted to help adults because I was recognizing like there were some limiting beliefs and hangups that I had about my own sexuality that I needed
Correct.
to figure out and process. And so through that, I met a mentor through that program, and she was like, there's like a master's degree for this. Like, you can get more training. Black women, we love all of our
Love all
degrees
the
and
degrees.
letters and all
Right.
that crap, right?
Exactly.
And so
Yes.
Right. So I ended up going back and getting another master's degree in human
Mm-hmm.
sexuality education. And that
Wow.
program really helps me process my own sexuality in order to be able to help other people. And I realized like there's a lot of Black women that I know who are going through the same exact things that I'm experiencing. They're experiencing shame and guilt around wanting to explore,
Yes.
wanting to be sexual, and some like not wanting to be sexual and told that they're a prude and like they're not going to be any fun, right? Because everybody wants that freak in the sheets, lady in the streets type of thing, right?
That exact
And so,
phrase is on my notes here.
right.
Exactly. Yes.
Right. So like there's all these different dichotomies. There's these tropes that Black women had to experience that impacts their sexuality and how they show up in a lot of different spaces. And I was like, nobody's talking about this. At least I didn't know
Right.
anybody talking about it, right? The only sex therapist I really knew or sex professionals I knew was Dr. Ruth, right?
Yes.
Everybody remembers
Everybody
Dr.
know
Ruth.
Dr. Ruth.
Right.
Yes.
And what I think Sue Johnson or Sue Johansson, I forget her last, it starts with a J, but she had
I don't know her.
this talk sex show on a late night. I want to say it was like Oxygen or something like that, where people
Mm-hmm.
would call in and she would answer their sex-based sexuality questions all night long.
Right.
And those were my two only references. Like, so two older white women.
White women. Yeah.
Right. That was it. And so I was not seeing women who looked like me having these conversations. And so from there, I was like, I got to do this work. Like, I have to be it for my community, at least here in New Jersey. Like, eventually I'll
Yes.
expand, but for at least here in New Jersey, I was like, I need to be that voice, at least to start off these conversations. And so that's what I did. My sister and I have two older sisters actually, but my middle sister and I started our private practice in
Mm-hmm.
2016. And I've been doing this ever since, helping particularly Black
Amazing.
women explore their sexuality. Yeah,
I love
my
that.
long-winded story.
No, it's fine. I love to hear the progression because you see social worker and you have a certain picture of what that is, and then you see certified
Mhm.
sex therapists and how do they all relate? How do they all go together? And
Yeah.
I'm glad that you mentioned your path as well, because I do think there are a lot of mental blocks, a lot of stereotypes, particularly heaped on Black women, right? That,
Mhm.
we are either over sexualized or we are super hyper conservative. And I
Right.
know
We're the Mamie or the Jezebel, one or the
right,
other.
exactly. And there's also this expectation, at least in where I grew up. I also have boomer parents, and I grew up. I went to a Christian school. I went to a Catholic school. I went to church, and my mom never talked to me about sex except to say, don't get pregnant. That was it.
Yeah.
Don't get pregnant. Don't bring home any babies. Obviously,
Mhm.
don't get a disease, but that was more school. School talked about
Mhm.
sexually transmitted diseases. But it was always seen as especially if you grew up in the church, it was always seen as sex is for marriage, and anything before that is bad. It's
Mhm.
bad. And
Mhm.
the hard part of the interesting part about that is you grow up you are careful, you try not to get pregnant, you try to be the good girl, then you get married, and that switch doesn't just automatically turn off like
Mhm.
you thought it would, or they don't teach you that it would, because they don't even say what you're supposed to do after you get married, but it doesn't turn off. And I
Mhm.
know, speaking from personal experience, it's that you battle that, like, okay, so now I'm married and now I can do everything, and what is everything, and how do I do that, and how do I become comfortable? What kind of,
Mhm.
when you are in your sessions and you're talking to Black women, what types of things are they expressing, that they need help with? You, why would somebody come to a sex therapist? Would Can you talk about that a
Right.
little?
Absolutely. So I get all the things. I get exactly what you were talking about, where they were raised in religious homes, very strict homes, and told like good girls don't have sex, or you have to wait until you're married to have sex. And, these messages are ingrained in them. So even when they are married, it's kind of like, well, if I have sex, does that mean I'm bad? Like, does that mean like I'm going to hell, or like I'm
Right.
sinning because I now want to have sex and I want to have this freeness when it comes
Right.
to my sexuality. And it's hard to contend with when you've had 20, sometimes 30 years of this one message that sex is bad. And there are so many risks involved with sex. And yes, there is risk, but there's also a lot of pleasure involved in
Right.
sexuality too, right? I get folks who are just learning how to be intimate in general, because people think that sex by itself is intimacy when there are so many different levels or forms
Right.
of intimacy that we can explore with our partners, with our family members, with our children, that we don't always think about. And so I'm helping folks unpack, like, what does intimacy look like and how can I have that more in my life? I work a lot with folks who might be experiencing some pain during sex. And so they might be working with either their gynecologist or a pelvic floor therapist to kind of
Hmm.
work through the more physical kind of
Right.
blocks that may have it. But sometimes there also are mental and emotional blocks to, experiencing pleasurable sex and not painful sex. So I think those go hand in hand. And a lot of times when I'm working with Black women, it's
Hmm.
just building that confidence that they
Yes.
are a sexual being, right?
Hmm.
Despite all the Jezebel, the Mamie, the Sapphire tropes that, this
Right.
society has placed on us, like we can be sexual beings and we can define what that sexuality looks like, right? Regardless
Right.
if you, again, want to, just be reserved and have some fun with your husband, right? Or if you want to be out in these streets and going to sex parties and, exploring BDSM and
Right.
kink, no matter what it is, you do not have to be ashamed about that. You are not a
Right.
bad person for wanting one or the other, right? You are
Hmm.
just a human being. And that's
Right.
it. So it ranges, right? The only thing I do not do when it comes to sexuality with my
Okay.
clients is watch them have
Okay.
sex. I do not watch them have sex. I do not engage in sex, which is a question I get very often.
Can you
So
help
I'm
me by
like,
showing me exactly how to
right.
do this thing? That's
I
interesting.
may, I may do like a demo on a dildo or show you. I usually have my vulva puppet. Like I may
Uh-huh.
show you certain things on demos, but we are not touching each other. I'm not watching you perform anything on your partner. Like I don't want to watch videos of you performing.
Correct.
And it's great. It's great to have those, but not for me, right? There are other professionals out there who do that type of work.
Are
Like
there?
there might be
Okay.
some, like you could hire a sex worker. There might be some sex surrogates who can support you in doing those type of things. But of course, you want to figure out what the legalities are in your state for those. I
Right.
have to put that disclaimer. But like a sex therapist is not the one to do that with you.
I'm learning so much just in 10 minutes. I didn't even know that wouldn't even occur to me to ask a sex therapist to watch me. But
Yes,
what's so
yes.
interesting about, this whole conversation is, I think what's remarkable to me about Black women is that have this way about us that we want to evolve, we want to improve, we want to, just kind of define our lives for ourselves. And the
Mm-hmm.
interesting thing about sex is that, when you're working with your clients and helping them feel more confident, men, I don't hear them having to go to therapy for this kind of thing. And unless there's a
Mm-hmm.
problem, right? Unless there's some sexual dysfunction in terms of like,
Mm-hmm.
they can't, physically perform. But when it
Right.
comes to exploring intimacy, when it comes to being, confident or, I don't hear that happening a lot. I know you see mostly Black women, but do you hear from your colleagues or from other people that
Mm-hmm.
men also, and I say this because this is the last thing I'll say, is because I feel like their introduction to sex is very different from a woman's. It is
Mm-hmm.
but it's different, but it's also just as harmful to them and their partner. But I don't see
Absolutely.
people pushing sex therapy on men a lot. So,
Mm-hmm. So I do have some male clients that I see. Like
mhm.
everybody comes to me. Like even though my focus is on Black women, I get white women, I get Asian women,
Mhm.
Hispanic, Latina women, like
Yeah,
everything. And I also get men that are not necessarily in couples or partnerships in this at that point in time. So yes, there are some men starting to recognize, number one, that therapy in general is great, but also I can use some support in intimacy building in my relationships and my sexuality as a whole. So there are men coming to sex therapists and therapists in general. I will say that I do believe that men are socialized a bit differently in terms of their sexuality, right? A lot of times it is encouraged for young men to have sex and,
mhm.
have sex for the first time at a younger age, right? I find that a lot of the men that I work with have had sex at like 11, 12 with someone who was older than them, right?
Right.
And the impact that has had on them. Like they see it as a badge of honor. Whereas if it was the reverse that happened, if it was like
Right.
11, 12-year-old young woman who had sex with an older man, that would be considered rape because technically it is rape, right?
Mhm.
Or that would be considered inappropriate in some way, or she was too fast in some way, right?
Right.
And so our young boys aren't socialized in that way to see sex as something that is shameful, to see that sex is something that they should not be doing in some way, right? Whereas our
Mhm.
young girls are told all of these negative messages like, don't get pregnant, right? Like you're gonna ruin
Right.
your life if you have sex and get pregnant
Right.
by somebody, right? Like even when I was younger and I was starting to explore my sexuality a little bit more, I was afraid to talk to my parents about it, right? Like,
Right.
because I would constantly get my mom like coming into my room, like, I had a dream about fish last night. Do you know who's pregnant? I'm like, Lord help me. Like, why are you coming to me about
We all had the
this?
same parents. We all had the same
Right.
parents. Yes.
Right. And like three girls, like I have two older sisters. Like we all
Hmm.
kind of got those similar messages of like, don't come home pregnant. Don't,
Correct.
like, don't explore your sexuality. That was the message that we received. Whereas young boys tend to get told, explore it. Like the more bodies you have, the better. Right. And
Right.
I think there is a subtle shift that's starting to happen now
Hmm.
with these newer generations, like our generations and younger are starting to say like, no, like pleasure is okay for young people as
Right.
well. You just have to do it and be mindful of the consequences, whether they be good consequences or bad consequences, right? So I think there is starting to become a shift. And because there are more people talking about sex and sexuality in a more healthy way,
Right.
then I'm hoping
Yeah.
that it will change because it is okay for young girls to explore their sexuality and have fun exploring their sexuality as well, right? As long as they can handle those potential consequences.
Right. So, I mean,
Mhm.
you're saying a lot. I had Dr. Lex on here on the podcast before, and she talked about, how to raise sex positive kids without shame. and a lot of very valuable information. But the thing that is interesting is that you can't do that if you're not that way yourself. And so how do you, I think, parents who are comfortable in their sexuality, understand pleasure, can teach that in a way that is effective and that is positive to their children. But if you're not, then your kids won't get that. And I think I have friends who still feel uncomfortable talking to their kids. I mean, look, my kids are 11 and 13, so I'm at a very precarious age right now, and I am evolving in the way that I think about it and how I want to talk to them. Now, do they want to talk to me about it? They're still like,
you've opened the door, it sounds like
hey,
I'm here if you need me.
My daughter's like, oh my God, are we gonna talk about it again? But so let's talk a little bit about the pleasure coach. What is a pleasure coach? And why did you choose those terms to define what you do?
So, a pleasure coach is someone who supports others in literally just finding pleasure, right? So, that is how I view a pleasure coach. I use those words to signify, like, I want you to have pleasure in literally every aspect of your life, right? And coaching allows me to expand my reach a little bit more than therapy does, right? So, as a therapist, you can only see clients in the states that you are licensed in, right? Whereas a coach is not as much of a regulated field just yet, anyway. And you're able to reach people globally. So you can give them tools and strategies to be able to say, like, hey, this is what you are struggling with in terms of adding more pleasure into your life. And these are the ways that you can actually tangibly work towards that goal of having more pleasure, whatever that may look like. So I have clients who are coming to me specifically to, explore maybe different kinks, right? And want to do it in a safe way, right? I may have folks who have partners who are just looking for ways to be more sexually intimate with each other, like, or find more creative ways to be sexually intimate with each other. I have folks who are just trying to elevate their careers and be more vocal in getting what they want out of their careers, right? So I talk about pleasure in like literally literally all aspects of your life, right? Whether it's family, career, your romantic relationships. It's how can we add more fun? How can we add more joy? How can we add more balance in your life through coaching?
Okay, so I do want to put a pin in it. I know people heard kinks. I'm gonna get there, people. I'm getting to kinks. I'm getting to pleasure parties. I'm getting to all of that. But one of the things that I really want us to focus on is, the podcast is about, the upliftment of women, uplifting yourself, being comfortable in who you are, and just finally reaching a stage where you feel like you're ready to define who you are for yourself and accept that and disregard what the world is telling you to be. And I spend a lot of time, I spend time on here talking about confidence, and I spend time talking to therapists and coach and how to communicate and da 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 da. And one of the areas that is kind of a blind spot is in sexuality, is in the bedroom. How do we take that confidence that you feel at work or that surety that you feel with your family and have that extend into the bedroom? And, when I told, people that, I'm talking to a sex therapist, what do you guys want to talk about? Like, I'm like, give me some juicy things to talk to her about. Like, what do you guys want to hear? The number one thing I got was, okay, I'm too tired. I'm too, like, it's become routine. How do I get out of I'm like, that wasn't exactly what I was thinking about, but let's talk about, how do you, before you even get to a kink, how do you even get to opening up or evolving your mindset to be more open when it comes to sex, particularly if you're over 40? Yeah.
So a big part of that, and what I often work my clients through is, acknowledging their limiting beliefs, right? Recognizing what messages have you received throughout your life about your sexuality, right? And sexuality is an umbrella term. Again, it's not just about sex, right? It's
Right.
about how you view your body, right? It's about intimacy. Can you be vulnerable with other people? It's about your identity, right? So, how do you express your identity? What is
Right.
your gender? What is your sexual orientation? It's about your health, your body, like your reproductive health, and
Mm-hmm.
what your relationship you have to that. And then it's also about, how do you use your sensuality, your sexuality to manipulate, or how has it been used to manipulate you in some way, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so when you can really parcel out a lot of the messages you received in those different areas, you can get to the core of what might be some barriers to
Right.
you moving forward in your confidence, moving forward with trying different things in the bedroom, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so when you can figure that out, then that next step is, okay, what are some new messages that I want to know, right? What are some new
Right.
messages I want to believe about myself and my sexuality and the values and beliefs that I hold around a lot of these things? Because honestly, like I feel like our sexuality shapes our values and beliefs about literally everything in our lives.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Also,
And
can you
that
explain?
yeah. So how we show up, say, like, let's take our sensuality for a second. That's how our body responds to the stimuli around us through our senses, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how we show up in the world. So if you are not necessarily um, a fan of your body, if you don't like the way certain things look, if you're constantly nitpicking and judging your body on different levels, how are you going to show up in the boardroom and present like this amazing presentation of all the knowledge and work that you've done, right? Like you would be really shy. You want somebody else
Right.
to do it. Like you do all this work and you go present it because I don't want all these eyes on me, right?
Mm-hmm.
That impacts your values and how you are
Right.
moving through society, right? And so, like, it's little things like that that impact how we view different experiences in our lives and what we hold on to, right? Like, even with intimacy, if you don't know what intimacy is, how are you going to show love and care for your children,
Mm.
right? If you don't know necessarily know how to be intimate with them in a healthy, supportive way, right? Will your children feel loved in that dynamic between the two of you?
Right.
So yes, little things like that.
Yeah. That's
Mhm.
interesting. So it all starts with the mind. I feel like anything, it all goes back to how you're feeling
It
about
does.
yourself, how you're feeling
Mhm.
about the choices that you've made in your life, getting back to mindset. So if
Mhm.
you are, if you know you just want to take baby steps to trying something new. I mean, one of the things that, if you're raising a family, you're working, you are, you're just busy. It's busy in life. And
Mhm.
so sex
Mhm.
becomes routine. And so,
Mhm.
even if you just want to change up your routine a little bit, what are some ways that women can, you know, kind of break the routine of sex in their life?
Right. So there's a lot of different factors that would
Right.
need to be kind of considered, right? Like you have to think about your energy levels and what you got going on. Because if
Right.
you are like the top of your field, you running after children, you're running after a partner, like and dealing with
Yes.
family members, like your energy levels might not be there, right? So you do want to be able to carve out some time to be able to focus on you, whether that is 15 minutes a day
Right.
or an hour or like spending a whole day to explore you, right? And that's the first thing is really to explore your body, explore what you like, right? And it doesn't just have to be masturbation, but I love encouraging people to masturbate,
Right. Right. Right.
honestly.
Right.
But masturbation is really good and it's helping you explore what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and
Mm-hmm.
using those five senses to kind of explore what feels good and doesn't feel good, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
making some variations in that, because a lot of times we just think of touch when it comes to sex, but you can use sight, you can use sounds, you can use
Mm-hmm.
sense it, like your nose, your smell, you can
Right.
use taste, all those different things to be able to explore what feels good for you.
Right.
And so once you have been able to kind of parcel out, like, okay, this feels good, then I can take the next step of exploring, right? So, not necessarily going out and exploring, but we have literally the world at our fingertips between our computers, our
Right.
tablets, our phones, right? Like, we can start searching things. Like you could put in a hashtag on a social media account, or put in a keyword in Google, and you will be able to find something that
Right.
is related to whatever you're
You're
curious
interested
about.
in. Mm-hmm.
Right. And granted, you may not get the best information out there, the most accurate information, but at least
Right.
it'll start, getting your wheels spinning about, this seems interesting. I like that. I might want to do more of that. Or I don't really like that. That wasn't cool for me, right? Like that's not
Right.
going to work for me.
I like that you
And
use the word curious in your,
mhm,
like, to follow your curiosity,
yes.
and don't kind of squash it, but it's okay
I'm
to
all
go and
about being curious. Like that's one of
mm-hmm.
the main things, especially I tell the couples that I work with, is be curious about yourself and be curious about your partner too, right? Because
Right.
that will take you a really long way. When we try to box ourselves in, right? Like humans love to label and categorize things, right? But when we
Right.
try to do that, it cuts us off from so many different wonderful things that we can be experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, I forgot who I was talking to, but I was recognizing that, like, when I was younger, I used to get in trouble a lot from my parents. I'm the youngest. So, like, I
Mm-hmm.
was always into something. I try new things, right? And I
Right.
used to say, like, I never got in trouble for the same thing twice, right? Like, I would do something, and if I liked it, okay. If I didn't like it or I got in trouble for it, I know I wasn't going to do that again. Right.
Right.
And that's the curiosity that I have kept my entire life. Right. Like, I'm
Mm-hmm.
going to try just about anything once. Right. At the
Right.
very least, if I don't like it, okay, that was a one time thing. I don't need to do it again. But if I figure out that I love it and it's really fun, oh my goodness, this could be life changing for
Right.
me. So I might as well just try it out and see
Yeah.
what could happen. Right.
And I
And
like
then
that.
once you find some things, you can
Uh-huh.
then hire a professional, whether it's a sex therapist, a pleasure coach, a sex coach, whoever, to be able to safely guide you through kind of exploring that new thing.
Yeah. And I like that you can do that by yourself. Like you don't have to
Mm-hmm.
have a partner in order
Nope.
to kind of explore your sensuality, your sexuality. You can do things by yourself and be curious about yourself. Be
Mm-hmm.
curious about, even if you don't have anybody to be curious about, there are things about yourself that you don't know about yourself. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that part is key, particularly for women who are getting older and they feel like, oh, I know, or I feel, or is there anything new to discover? There are things to discover because number one, our body is changing. We don't have the same
Mm-hmm.
body, biologically well, not biologically, but we don't have the same body we had when we were 20, internally it's
Right.
changing. So
Mm-hmm.
just like you can't eat the same foods you used to eat when you were 20, now there may be things that have changed about you that you can explore.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you're right. We live in a time where information is at your fingertips, and honestly, anything that you want to know is out there. Anything that you want to try can discreetly show up on your doorstep like the next day.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm. And a nice
it's
white package. Nobody
in
will
a
ever
nice
know.
discreet package. You can take it and try it, and I think that is, we're living in a time where we're kind of lucky. So in some ways it's like sensory overload where it's like, oh, it's a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But in
Mm-hmm.
the other ways it allows you to explore as much as you want to explore. So so if you've decided that, I want to try new things, I want to be open, I want to, do things, and you're partnered with someone, how do you bring them along? Like, how do you guys get on the same page about what we're going to do in, this
Mhm.
new mind space that we're in?
Mhm. So one phrase that I have kept with me since I was teaching that sex ed program at that high school to now is a term called teachable moments, right?
Okay.
These are opportunities. Before it was used in the context of parents talking to their teens about sex, but I feel like this can be transferable to literally any relationship that you have.
Mm-hmm.
So if you find something that you might find interesting, that you might want your partner to explore with you, but you're not really sure how they would receive this, find that article, that video clip, that book, that,
Mm-hmm.
reel, whatever,
Right.
that you can find and share, like, hey, I just came across this. What do you think about this? Like,
Right.
would you try it? Would you not want to try it? And just to kind of temper what they might think about this particular thing, you might be really surprised and they're like, oh, yes, I could get down with that. Let's do that right now.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And then sometimes you might get a partner like, oh, what is wrong with you? That is gross. And yes, that may feel really icky and awkward and like just bad if a partner judges you in that way, right? And but a
Mm-hmm.
lot of times people's judgments is based off of fear, is based off of lack of knowledge about that particular thing.
Right.
So that next step, if you do have a partner who's kind of like, I don't know about this, right? You could again hire a professional to help, you to talk through it.
Right.
Or you can simply be curious and ask them, so what about this do you not like, right? Do you think it's a physical safety thing? Is it,
Mm-hmm.
you just never known about it? Like just asking the question of what makes you not like this can start like a free flowing conversation that
Mm-hmm.
can then create more intimacy between you and your partner because you both are being vulnerable in that particular
Right.
moment. Ideally, they will be able to share some deeper emotions connected to it if the line of questioning isn't kind of
Right.
like accusatory or like, like, why don't you like this? You should be liking this
Right.
type of thing.
So
And
that's
then going from
interesting.
there.
So do you think that, just given the way that you described it and you brought vulnerability and communication into, the conversation, do you feel like people can be sexually incompatible? Or do you feel like you can work it out if you have the right tools to do that, with communication,
Mhm.
with being vulnerable, with being open? Is there what makes can you overcome sexual incompatibility if you feel like you have that in your relationship?
So, yes and no, right?
Okay.
Like, I do believe that there are couples who get together who are sexually incompatible, right? And if the they're both partners are open and willing to having some deeper conversations about what is needed, what is desired, and some of the blocks around it, I think the compatibility can grow over time, especially if you are willing to put in that effort and that work to do that, right? Because
Right.
the physical act of sex, right, that can be taught, right? But again, when you think about your core values and beliefs in that way, sometimes
Mhm.
that is not able to be changed. And so you do have to consider that if it's really like, I don't want any parts of this and I'm not willing to explore and be curious with this about you, then no,
Right.
it's not going to work. But if the partner is at the very least open to understanding a little bit more, then yes, I think that incompatibility can be reversed in some way.
Okay. So
Mhm.
the other thing that I want to talk about, so if you have decided that, okay, you're in a relationship, or even if you're single and you want to, you mentioned kinks, you mentioned BDSM. Well, maybe you didn't, but I've been on your
Yeah,
social
I
media
did.
so much. Okay. I'll add like swingers and play parties. First of all, let's describe, because there is, monogamous sex that you can have with your partner and you can be completely happy with that. What is so if you want to explore further, how do you start? What is the kink, and how do you know that you have a kink? Like, how do you know?
So I have to say, kink, BDSM, and traditionally non-monogamous relationships, alternative relationship styles, that's my jam, right? Like
Okay.
I love
Okay.
talking about it. When I went and got that second master's, that was honest, that was my focus. Most of my papers and things were on Black people who were non-monogamous, because again, I wasn't hearing anybody talking about this and I was
Right.
curious about it, so I was like, okay, I got to figure this out type of thing.
Yeah.
And so that's first off. So there's a lot of different terms, right? And I probably can't explain all of them here on this
Right.
podcast, because this will probably need to be like a 15-week course to kind of explain
Of
all the
course.
different terms, right? Which I do teach as well. But,
Okay.
so when we think about monogamy versus non-monogamy, that most people understand that, right? Like mono
Right.
meaning one, you have one partner at a time, essentially. And non-monogamy, a lot of times we add like consensual non-monogamy to that, or ethical non-monogamy, because we want to make sure we delineate the fact that people are aware that they are not the only partner in this, right? Because
Right.
non-monogamy happens all the
All the
time. Like
time.
people would just be out here, right?
They just
But
don't know. You
everybody,
in a right.
right.
You are in a y'all swinging and you don't know. Well, one person swinging, the other person is completely,
Right.
has no clue.
Exactly. Exactly. And so under non-monogamy, there's a lot of different, like I always show this like graphic that has like a ton of different ways you can be non-monogamous.
Mm-hmm.
But the ones that are a little bit more popular right now, you hear a lot of folks talking about swingers. And so this
Mm-hmm.
is traditionally a couple who may invite other people into their bedroom, like together, or they may swap partners with like
Mm-hmm.
another couple or throuple, depending on, what you're really into.
Right.
And it's more sexual based, right? That a lot of times it's not like we're trying to build a romantic relationship, we're trying to, have you be a part of our family type of thing. Swinging typically is just sex.
Okay.
And then you might have someone who's polyamorous, they believe in multiple loves. So they are open to having multiple romantic and or sexual relationships with people, right? So
Mm-hmm.
sometimes those are more long-term relationships where you're really building a connection with folks. And of course,
Right.
there's all different types of configurations under
Right.
polyamory as well. But like that's the more popular parts of like consensual non-monogamy at this point.
Right.
And then you also get into kink, right? So kink is
Okay.
an umbrella term that describes any sexual behaviors that are not traditionally or inherently sexual, right?
Okay.
So we think of folks who, and honestly, just about everything can be a kink, right?
Right.
So outside of like missionary sex, pretty much could be considered a kink depending on who you're talking to, right? And
Okay.
considering their level of exploration and experience with these different behaviors. Like somebody
Okay.
might see getting your ass spanked while you're in doggy style as a kink, or like
Right.
we might see people who want to be tied up, like have their hands restrained
Right.
during sex. That can be a kink, right? And so under that kink umbrella, you may have what we call BDSM. So BDSM stands for bondage, dominance or discipline, submission or sadism, and then masochism, right?
Okay.
There's some variations within that as well. Like some people use like master slave monikers, which I don't typically like to use because of, my ancestors' history with,
Obvious reasons.
being
Yes.
enslaved, right? So
Right.
that's my own personal
I can see
kind
that.
of,
Right.
right. And so that BDSM can encompass so much, right? People automatically tends to think of whips, chains, leather when they think of BDSM. But there's some, like, submission could be servitude, right? So
Mm-hmm.
submission could just be like, I'm caring for this person. Dominance could be just, again, I'm caring for this person and telling them how to, do certain things. And if they don't do certain things, there might be
Mm-hmm.
some type of discipline involved in it, where, like,
Right.
you break a rule, there's a punishment type of thing, right? So there's
Right.
a lot that can be encompassed in just BDSM by itself. That doesn't always mean I'm getting my ass spanked, or, somebody's pulling my hair, or whatever the case may be. So
So
all
Shanta,
that.
I have a question. So I'm gonna be honest because I'm thinking like, everything that you mentioned, kinks, BDSM, I never really thought about Black people participating in this.
Mhm.
When it comes to swinging and thruples, I feel like that's something that kind of used to be on the fringes, and it's not as much anymore. There was a
Mhm.
page I didn't follow him, but I used to go to his page to see what was happening. He had two wives, or a wife and a
Mhm.
girlfriend. So they used to put
Mhm.
it on, I used to follow it like it was a soap opera. So I feel like that is not on the fringes as much anymore, and people
Mhm.
are open to
Mhm.
having more than one partner consensually. Everybody agrees. But when it
Mhm.
comes to BDSM and things like that, I feel like maybe those are still kind of on the fringe. I think of 50 Shades of Grey. I think of, I don't think of Black people doing that. Do you experience a lot of, is there a Black community for this? I'm sure there is. But can you explain like what it's like in,
It Yes. So, again, a part of my passion is working with Black folks who want to explore these alternative sexual lifestyles in this
Mhm.
way, because there is a community and it's really hard to find that community. So, I like to be there to support folks who are just finding their way in all of this. I'll say, like, when I again, back when I was in that second master's program, that's when I really started to explore these lifestyles.
Mhm.
And I realized, in just kind of going to different events, that I was like the only Black person at these events. And I was just like,
Interesting.
where the sisters at? Where the brothers at? Like, give me
They were
something.
way
And it,
underground, like.
right. And it was really awkward for me. Like, the comments, the microaggressions that I would get, going into these spaces. Like, sometimes I felt like a fetish myself, because, like, they were like, "Ooh, the Black girl. The Black girl must be wild and fun, and, like, I want to get that right." I was getting all of that. And, like, a lot of times, and I'm not trying to sound judgmental or anything like that, but a lot of times the spaces that these, events were held in weren't the best spaces. Like, I felt unsafe in them, just
Oh.
in my environment, right? And they were just weird. Like, it was weird for me anyway.
Mhm.
And I'm a bougie Black girl, like. Like, I like nice things, and I like aesthetically for things to just look up to par.
Mhm.
And it wasn't giving that for me when I
Right.
first started out in the lifestyle. And then through just constantly going to events, finding online communities where there were like one or two Black or, brown folks who were in those spaces, and then they shared, an event that was coming up that had a little bit more, Black and
Right.
brown folks. And, like, it just kind of kept trickling from there until I was able to kind of really find, okay, this is how you find these pockets of people where, they're interested in the same things that you are, and they actually
Right.
look like you and understand your background and things like that. So it was really hard. And that's a big part of why I started my event called Black Girls Munch. Is
Mhm.
because I wanted a safe space for Black women to come in New Jersey, to be able to explore and talk about some of the resources that were out there and do
Okay.
that in a safe space.
Uh,
So yeah, it was really hard. Yes, there are Black people in kink and BDSM. Like Black people do all the things, right? It's
Black
not
people
just
do
the white thing.
everything.
Black
Right.
people do everything, right? And like I do believe the community is starting to grow a lot more because people are feeling more comfortable, right? Because when you know that there are other people out there that look like you're
Right.
like, oh shit, I'm normal. Like it's okay for me to
Exactly.
be like this, and so I can share this with the world as well.
So I do want to talk a little bit about your events, but if somebody is not in New Jersey, maybe they're on the other side of the country, like what kind of resources do they have? Can you recommend? Are there books? Are there websites? Are there
Mhm,
like
mhm,
chat
mhm.
room? I don't know.
Yes. So there are books, there are websites. So I kind of started off on this website called fetlife.com, right? It's kind of like a Facebook for kinksters, they kind of go by. That website can be a little sketchy because people don't always know how to approach folks in a
Mhm.
respectful way. So you just have to be mindful. Like you're going to get a whole bunch of DMs and you could not even have a picture up and people are going to start DMing you about like what
Wow.
they want to do to you. So you just have to be mindful of that.
Okay.
um, there are a few books out there, and of course, I'm blanking on them right now. One is Love is Not Colorblind, by Kevin. I hope I don't butcher his last name, but Kevin Peterson or Kevin Patterson. I want to say it's
Hmm.
Peterson. Um, he wrote a really good book about like being Black and in the lifestyle and how to find support as well. Um, and there is Molina Williams has a book called Playing Well with Others, which is really good. She's a Black kinkster. And then it's like more of a kind of historical text called The Color of Kink. And
Hmm.
that's a good book for just kind of like an overview of the history of Black people in kink to let you know that we've been in this for a minute.
Right.
So it's
Right.
really good. So those are the resources that are typically out there. And then Instagram, social media is really good. Like putting in those hashtags, you will find your community
Right.
big
And if
time.
you're on the East Coast, so you have a few events so
Yeah.
that for different audiences. So you have the
Mhm.
Black Girls Who Munch is so
So it's
the
just Black girls munch,
oh,
not Black girls who munch. It's I get that a lot too.
Black Girls Munch. Is this
Black girls munch.
is that common terminology? Is that in
So
the
yes,
okay.
it's been co-opted by social media a bit, right? Because now people are using the word munch to mean like someone who is just always giving and not really getting anything in return,
Hmm.
whether that be sexually or financially or things like that.
Oh,
But
okay.
right, munches are traditionally in the kink community are social spaces where you can go and learn more about the kink and BDSM community or any other type of
Right.
sexual minority community, right?
Okay.
Um, where like, and it's typically held at like a what we call a vanilla setting. So you would just
Hmm.
go to a regular restaurant and things like that. You just meet up with folks and get to learn and hear about some of the different parties, hear about new kinks and things
Right.
like that. And so that's what we use. That's the term we use in the kink lifestyle, kink BDSM lifestyle to help people find their community, right? So
Is
I
it
created
open?
Black Girls Munch to do that.
Black Girls Munch. So
Mhm.
is it do you make it easy for people who are newer to all of this or who just want to explore to come out and they won't feel like, you know, I guess you
That's
need to come with
ideally
open
what
minds.
munches are supposed to
Right.
be, right? They're for kind of the newbies to possibly talk with some veterans or for
Okay.
veterans to meet other people in a like it's really designed to be like all levels, right? And I particularly make sure I make all of my events, whatever I have, because I'm an introvert at heart, right? People were
Wow.
like,
Mm-hmm.
really?
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
And so like sometimes it takes me a little bit of while to like start talking to people and breaking out of my
Right.
shell at certain
Same. I
events.
relate.
So I make sure all of my events have opportunities for you to connect and talk to other people in a safe way, in a way that isn't just going to put you on the spot or anything like that. Like it's a, like there's no clicks involved. Like just because you've been in the lifestyle for 20 years doesn't mean you can't have an amazing conversation and learn something new from somebody who just started a year ago, right?
Okay.
And so that's how I curate literally all of my events, but especially my Black Girls Munch event, because
Black
it
girls
is that
lunch.
stepping stone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
I
so
get
you
people
all,
from all over to attend too. Like have people come from all over the tri-state area. Like I've had people
mm-hmm.
travel for like 2-3 hours to get to my event. So it's really
Well, I'm in
dope.
Maryland. If I can go up there to go to an amusement park, certainly to
Okay.
take my kids to the indoor water park. So clearly I could do that. So you have Black Girls Munch, you have
Hmm.
Stiletto Steak and Sex. So what's that
Yes.
event about?
Oh, that's my one of my baby events. Like they're all my signature events, but Stiletto Steak
Mm-hmm.
and Sex I really loved, because I again work with a lot of high powered, ambitious, like goal getting women who like kept being told like, oh, you're too masculine, right? Like that's
Mm-hmm.
why you're not being able to date, or you can't keep a relationship, or like things like that. Or I would have folks who, were told they were too feminine, like they're a
Right.
pushover, like nobody is really taking them serious. And I, was recognized like we need both of these. We need our masculine energy and our feminine energy to work together to be our best selves and to be great partners and to continue to grow in our careers, right? Like we need to
Right.
be able to learn how to tap into both sides of those characteristics. And so Stiletto Steak and Sex was birthed out of that, right? Or born out of. I like to say birthed
Mm-hmm.
out of that, where we're combining the traditionally feminine role of stilettos with the traditionally masculine steak, right? And we come together and
Mm-hmm.
talk about various sexuality topics and continue to explore our own beliefs about who we are and how we want to show up in the world in a sensual, sexual way.
Okay. Do you have how often do
Yeah.
you have these events? Are they pretty
So
often
my
or
stiletto steak, no.
okay.
My stiletto steak and sex event is annually. I usually host that in March of every year.
Okay.
And my Black Girls Munch event, I usually host two of those. So I host one in around like July, and then the second one is typically around my birthday, which is in September. But this year I couldn't do it in September because I had another work conflict.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm still debating if I'm going to have this second one before the year is out. If anything, it might be around December time.
Okay. So people can follow you
Mhm.
to figure out when your next event will be. So, okay.
Yes, yes,
So
yes.
there is a world of ways to explore how, your sexuality and your sensuality. So I just want to
Mhm.
have a little bit of fun and talk about like specific things that people can do either alone or with their partners. So what is your favorite product? Something that you
Mm.
bring with you. Maybe give us a few, a couple, three.
Lube.
Okay.
Lube is the number one product I literally carry with me everywhere.
Okay.
Whether I'm going to work, going to my parents' house, I got a packet of lube in my bag. Um, because I believe the wetter the better, right? Some people,
Okay.
feel like, oh, if my vagina isn't naturally lubricated, then there's something wrong with me. And no, that is not the case, right?
Hmm.
Lubrication it dries up. And so sometimes you need a little extra. So I'd rather have lube on me than not
Right.
have it and need it.
Right. And we didn't talk
So
about
lube,
perimenopause. We didn't talk about perimenopause,
right.
but
Go
that
ahead.
is a side effect of of perimenopause, and it doesn't mean that you're not interested. And I, sometimes I have to correct my husband about it. It's like, no, that doesn't, it just because it is doesn't mean just because it's super wet doesn't mean I'm ready to go, and just because it's not doesn't mean I'm not ready to go. So you can't really tell,
There's
you
so
can't really
much that
tell.
goes into
So
that, right?
yeah, for sure. So
Mm-hmm,
lube
mm-hmm,
is one.
mm-hmm.
What else, ma'am?
Lube, I love a good vibrator.
Right.
Vibrators are my jam because we know that the clitoris is typically what helps with, orgasms and experiencing of pleasure for, women identified folks who own a vulva, right? Like
Right.
that is what turns them on. That is what gets them to that next point. So when you can stimulate the clitoris in different ways, then you're more likely going to have a pleasurable experience with
Right.
sex, right? And so I love a good vibrator. I'm just thinking about all the things that I keep in my to go bag, like my hoe bag, like I like to call it. I like to,
Your
or
whole bag. All right.
some people say spend a night bag or like whatever, like that, like
Your pleasure pack.
overnight bag. Right. So lube, a good vibrator, whatever I'm feeling at the moment. I usually, of course, like if you're not in a committed relationship or if you're not in a relationship where you have talked about having unprotected sex and what that would mean for the two of you, always have condoms with you, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
you never know what you might get into in
Right. Right.
terms of
Right.
that. And yeah, like those are the three basics in terms of just everyday stuff. But a lot of times I keep like wipes, make sure you have hygiene stuff you need
Mm-hmm.
in there, like an extra change of pair of clothes. If you mess up the first set, you might want to have another set to
Right.
help you out a little bit. Those type of things.
You know what? It could be interesting, married women, women in committed relationships, and maybe you have gotten into a routine. So if you keep a little pleasure pack, a little whole bag on you, when your husband see that on your
Absolutely.
shoulder, he knows it's like, you know
You're like,
what? She
oh,
taking a bag. And that's one way
right.
to spice it up in a way that everybody doesn't necessarily know. It's like, oh, you bring in that
Mm-hmm.
bag? Okay, I
Mm-hmm.
thought we was just going to dinner. And also what I'll say about vibrators is that they've come a long way. There's so
Yes,
many
they
different
have.
types, so many
Mm-hmm.
different sizes. I feel like, whatever it is that you like when it comes to that, or whatever there's a toy for that. So let me ask
Absolutely.
you this about vibrators, because I think, sometimes men feel insecure about them. They don't replace, like they don't, I think men feel so insecure that they replace, or they can be replaced with that, and I don't feel like that's the case,
Mm-mm.
but men should
Mm-mm.
not be intimidated by that,
Right.
at
I
least in
love
my
to
case.
say toys are your teammates. They're not your competition, right? They're designed to accentuate your sexual experiences, not to be the end all be all of your sexual experiences. Like for some people, that's all they can get in that moment. And sometimes that's all they may want in the moment, but
Mm-hmm.
there's no replacement for human connection because humans need humans, right? We need
Mm-hmm.
that physical touch. We need that intimacy that we cannot and will never be able to get from a vibrator or a dildo or whatever other toy that you have tried to, bring in, right? So they're there to help you explore more, to heighten the
Right.
sensations so you can heighten your sense of pleasure, right? And like there are toys for God, like for, like say, toys for penis owners as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it doesn't just have to be toys for vulva owners. Like you can incorporate both if you need to, or if you like to.
Okay. So this will be my last question for you. So I like the way you talk about human connection, intimacy, you know, exploring pleasure outside of intercourse. One of the things that is talked about often, particularly when it relates to women, is the emotion that comes along, with sex. And if you are feeling like you want to be free and open-minded. Where do emotions come into play with that? Is that a myth that, people can emotionally attach emotions to sex, or can detach them from sex at will? Like, how do you feel about the emotional aspect of it?
So I come from a school of thought that emotions will always be there. There's no way to fully get rid of emotions. It's going to be, now, what do you do with those emotions? That
Mm-hmm.
is the key, right? Some people can just kind of compartmentalize, keep their emotions to themselves and not feel the need to act on them in certain ways, or don't feel the need to share them with others, right? Or other people. No, like, I need to explore this. I need to figure out what these emotions are and how can I either stop them or can help them continue to grow in some
Right.
way. And so, like, that is, again, natural human experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there are some people who can have sex, right? Have sex with
Right.
multiple people and not necessarily say, like, I am going to get emotionally attached to this person. Like, there
Mm-hmm.
may be emotions there for this person. Like, I'm sure, like,
Right.
they'll care about them, be considerate of them, have
Mm-hmm.
empathy towards them, and they don't see it necessarily as, like, I am now attached to this person. This person is now mine, right? Like, I
Right.
need this person in my life at all times, right? And there's, I think, a lot that goes into a person's ability to do that or not be able to do that. I think, again, a lot of it can stem from your own attachment style as an adult. And that, again, that's
Right.
a whole nother conversation,
Right.
because that stems from, like, childhood experiences and, things like that. So, like, all of that, all these different layers can impact how someone might say, like, yes, I'm going to make this emotional attachment to somebody, or no, I do not want to make this emotional attachment to somebody. So I think
Okay.
it's definitely possible for people to somewhat compartmentalize in those ways, but I do feel like the emotions are always going to be there, because we can't
Okay.
just take out emotions from the human experience. So
Right. Right. Well, this has been a wonderful conversation. I feel like there are so many things that we can, take the road, go down a path this way or that way. So many
mhm.
things. So, but you've been so
Yeah.
great.
Aw.
I've really enjoyed talking to you, and
Yeah.
wonderful smile, great skin, guys. Oh my God.
Thank you.
So
Same. I was looking like gorgeous, honey.
So, and maybe we can have you back to talk more deeply about
Yes.
any one of these topics, but I've enjoyed our time. Thank you so much.
Um,
Where can people
yeah.
follow you, either on social media or your website? I know
Mhm.
you have your own
Mhm.
practice. So tell us
Mhm.
where they can find
So
you.
the best place is always through my own website, because that's what
Mhm.
I own myself, because social media can act funny at any point. So
Yes.
you can find me at bluewellnesscenter.com. And that's blue like the color, spelled out
Yes.
BLUE. I get that a lot. So bluewellnesscenter.com. You can sign up for my email list on there. You can, inquire about sessions on there, whether for therapy or for
Mhm.
coaching. And, like, yeah, it's the best way to contact me. And I am on social media, mostly on Instagram, under NJ underscore sex therapist. So I'm
Mhm.
super active on there as well.
Yes, and I found
Mhm.
Chanta on Instagram, and you
Yeah.
have a lot of great content, a lot of good information. So if
Thank you.
you heard something that you want to explore here, check out her social media page, because there's good content there as well.
Thank you. Thank
So
you. Thank
thank
you
you
so much
so
for having me.
much.
This was fun.
Yes, it was fun. Thank you so much for joining me. And for everybody else, I will see you next time.